21. It's a frightening, haunting picture. He sits in a courtroom guarded by policemen. There is no room for the public. The courtroom is packed with reporters from every part of the globe. The man in the prisoner's box is a seedy, weedy little guy who never made an imprint on the world until now. And there he is smirking, and the smirk says, "I assassinated Elvis Presley." It is a vision that is forever with Elvis Presley, and he has even told the West Boys what he wants done if ever it happens. Look, the FBI and the cops have a job to do. They have to arrest the guy. But if it ever does happen, I want you guys to get him first. I want you to get him before the cops do. And when you find him, I want you to pop his eyeballs out with your thumbs. I want you to rip his tongue out. I want you to tear him to pieces. I don't want no son of a bitch smirking in court that he killed Elvis Presley. If he had an unwarranted paranoia in the past about his personal safety when he lived in virtual seclusion while making his movies, it all changed in August 1969. That was when the fear became justified because Presley was a constant target for death threats and extortion plots. It was in 1969 that the decision was made that Presley would go before a live showroom audience, his first appearance in 9 years, and it was then that Red West and Sonny West, no longer expected to be stuntmen, stand-ins and faithful members of the Memphis Mafia, became bodyguards for real. There are several possible reasons for Presley's returning to live audiences: his hatred of the movies he was expected to churn out like popcorn, a genuine need to feel waves of love coming from real people, Colonel Tom Parker's realizing that the movie Rainbow had dulled and that the new pot of gold was to be found in live concerts. Whatever the reason, Colonel Parker maintained his reputation for faultless timing and showmanship because the change in gear worked perfectly for Presley's bank account. Even if it did introduce a whole new set of personal problems. The location for Presley's re-entry into live entertainment was to be the International Hotel, the $60 million extravaganza that would have looked out of place in any town but Las Vegas. It was the challenge he needed, says Red West, and he really went at it. There were plenty of doubts about him making his comeback to live shows. Everyone was asking, had he lost his touch? Could he still carry a live show? Would the Las Vegas crowd go for him? In the back of everyone's mind was the first time he had performed in Las Vegas at the Frontier Hotel in 1956. The Las Vegas customer just wasn't ready for him. He was ripping up the kids, but the crowd was too old for him. Of course, the Colonel made the big decision and he wasn't wrong. Sonny remembers that Presley really got himself in shape, both physically and mentally, for his Las Vegas opening. Barbra Streisand had opened the showroom and Presley was to follow her. Streisand was not an easy act to follow. She was a known quantity as far as audience appeal was concerned. She had just won an Oscar and her numbers were topping hit parades everywhere. Presley, despite his name, had been away from the center ring for 9 years. Big performers like have flopped before in Las Vegas, no matter what sort of show he might have turned in. However, the financial side was assured from the moment the booking office opened. It was an avalanche, not just from America. There were charter flights swinging their way from Britain, Australia, Japan. The Presley fans just refused to let the performance be a flop. And, of course, it was a sense of tie-in. Sonny West remembers, man, he looked great before he went on. He was nervous, sure, but he had rehearsed and rehearsed. He was trim as a 21-year-old. He looked fantastic. The sweet inspirations, a fast, moving black quartet, warmed up the audience for him, and the atmosphere in the showroom, which seats 2,500, was hard to describe, but there was definitely electricity bouncing off the walls. He burst onto the stage singing Blue Suede Shoes, and none of the first part of the number could be heard. As one mass, the crowd jumped to its feet and exploded with air, splitting applause. It seemed weirdly out of character for a showroom, a baseball stadium, a fight arena, the Coliseum of another era, yes, but not a gilded showroom that served rare steaks and French wines. The love affair picked up where it had left off. The women were a little stouter and the lights danced off gray hair. The men were fatter in the middle and thinner on top. But the love affair was raging again. He continued to paralyze them with I Got a Woman, Heartbreak Hotel, Love Me Tender, Hound Dog, and I Can't Stop Loving You. He also sang Suspicious Minds, one of his all-time personal favorites. Elvis Presley had never been away. As far as that crowd was concerned, he had simply been preparing for this night. That night, says Sonny, he was popping with natural energy, not energy from some damn pill, but pure Elvis Presley, physical, emotional and mental. He was popping like a new instrument. The scene after the show remains indelible in Sonny's mind. It was one of the most beautifully emotional things I had ever seen between two men. The Colonel came down after the show into the dressing room. He just said, "Where is he?" The Colonel, that old man, had tears in his eyes. His face was twisted in emotion. I had never seen him like that before. I was with Joe Esposito and we pointed inside. Elvis came out. The Colonel took one step forward and so did Elvis. There were no words. They just put their arms around each other in a big hug. The Colonel had his back to me and I knew it was a private thing where we shouldn't hang around. We excused ourselves, but the Colonel's body was shaking with emotion. I left there with a big lump in my throat. It was a beautiful moment. The Colonel extracted a massive 5-year contract from the International Hotel. They paid a staggering price for him, but they had no complaints, because he was a guaranteed sellout. He did a lot of great shows in Las Vegas, says Sonny. The challenge stayed with him for a year, more than a year. He would prime himself for Las Vegas. Both he and the Colonel loved the town, loved the atmosphere. This was show business at its best and they were both made for it. But, like everything else with Presley, the challenge eventually left him, and then he would get up there on stage and sing the same songs, show after show. The same show was okay when he was touring the country, but not in Las Vegas. The Colonel pleaded with him to get new songs, but even when he did, he wouldn't bother to learn them properly. Sonny recalls, there were times when he had a guy named Kenny Hicks actually lying under the plexiglass stage of the hotel in Las Vegas with idiot cards with the words to the songs. There were even times, says Red, I heard him announce to the audience that this was a new song he was singing and he didn't know the words, so he would actually read them off a piece of paper. I was amazed the audience stood for it. I'm also amazed that it never got into the newspapers, but he would just get up there and read the lyrics to a song. It was the same old thing. He was getting bored again, and when he got bored, that was when he was impossible to be around. He would be taking all his stuff and be wired all the time, and he would have us going where we wouldn't get 3 hours sleep in 3 days. To give Presley his due, the pressures on him began to mount. With public exposure came the waterfall of nut mail. A lot of it was dismissed as the ramblings of people who just wanted to write threatening notes. A lot of it was not. We tried to keep most of it away from Elvis, says Red West. But there was a lot of serious stuff coming down that he had to know about. One threat was serious enough for the FBI to involve itself. Sonny and Jerry Schilling were working the show in 1970 when a call came from a man who had taken the time and trouble to know how to get his message through. It was an extortion attempt. The caller said there was a madman intent on killing Presley for $50,000. He would give the name to Presley. Red was in Memphis at the time and Presley put in an emergency call for him to get to Las Vegas immediately. I arrived there, says Red, and Elvis just stumbled into my arms and hugged me. There was no doubt that he was taking this very seriously. So were we. And so were the FBI when a menu arrived addressed to Presley. The menu was for his Las Vegas appearance and had a photograph of Presley on the front. Someone had scribbled out the face and drawn a gun pointed to his heart. At the bottom of the menu, carefully written backward, were the words "Guess who?" and "Where?" The FBI tested it for fingerprints but found none. They were convinced it was the work of a badly twisted mind. Nothing came of it, says Red. But that engagement we had Sonny and Jerry Schilling in the Musicians pit with their guns ready. I was cruising the audience, so were the security guards at the hotel and the plainclothesmen of the FBI. As a matter of fact, one very suspicious guy I hassled turned out to be a Fed. Another time, in 1972, when Presley was halfway through the act, a tip came from the maitre d' who'd told Joe Esposito that there was thought to be a crazed woman in the audience who had a gun and was going to shoot Presley. Sonny recalls, when we got the message, Red and I stood up in front on the stage as a block to Elvis. Elvis moved to the back of the stage and sang in a sideways stance to make himself a smaller target. As the show came closer to the finale, Sonny and Red moved together, almost obliterating Presley from view. Red says that by the time the curtain came down, they stood right in front of him so that if there was a bullet, it had to hit them first. Damn, Sonny remembers, that curtain took about 20 seconds to come down but it felt like an hour. Red adds, man, I know I was shaking. I was ready to hear the pop of a gun and feel a doggone bullet go right through my heart. And I was thinking about my wife and kids. I was scared. By this time, Presley was paying Red and Sonny $425 a week. And today both of them feel a little stupid when they admit that they were willing to stop a bullet for that. If anyone was going to hurt him, Dave Hebler says, they would have had to kill us to get to him. That was the relationship. 99. The West Boys recalled that Presley, instead of showing real gratitude for their willingness to take a bullet for him, would boast to anyone who cared to listen, if a guy gets up with a knife, they take the knife for me. If it's a gun, they take the bullet for me. That's the kind of loyalty I can get. While some of the hairy, scary stuff was happening, however, Presley and the West Boys had not lost their devilish, perhaps a little wild, sense of humor. Red chuckles at one memory. There was a group that had joined Elvis, he says, called J. D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet. It was a very good gospel group led by J. D. Sumner, who must have the lowest bass voice in the world. Anyway, it was in 1972, when we're getting a lot of these threats, and they were very nervous about this. To break the monotony and have a little fun, Elvis, Sonny and myself decided on a bit of a practical joke. The joke was to tell J.D. Sumner and his group that there was a madman in the hotel with a gun who was trying to kill Presley. To set the prank up to perfection, Elvis, Sonny and Red recruited 3 of the security guards to be in on it with them. We decided, says Red, to act out a fake gunfight with an assassin. The assassin would be hidden, of course, because he was Sonny. Sonny and I load our guns with blanks and the security guards empty their guns, which, as it turned out, was a good idea for a reason that will become obvious. So I prime J.D. and his boys about what's happening and I tell them very earnestly to be very careful because there is a madman loose. Well, we are up in the suite and J.D. is checking inside doors and his boys are pretty nervous about what's coming down. Sonny was there and he left the suite with the excuse that he was going to check out the rest of the hotel. Left in the suite were J.D. Sumner, the Stamps Quartet, who were talking to Presley near the bar, and the 2 security guards. I leave by the front door, says Sonny, put on a black pigskin jacket and then return with my gun loaded with blanks through the back entrance to the suite while the crowd inside are talking about this madman. Then the sinister black-clad arm of Sonny reaches around a corner and he shouts, "You son of a bitch," and he starts firing away. Bang, bang, bang. Red dashes to the hallway, gun blazing, and then yells "Oh." He staggers back into the suite dead. The next fusillade of shots cuts down the security guards who were in on the prank. They're all dead and it's a mass slaughter. Panic and terror seize J.D. and his group. Donnie Sumner, J.D.'s nephew, ran from one side of the suite to the other in 2 giant steps and hurdled the bar to an accompaniment of smashing glasses. J.D. Sumner bravely threw himself across Presley. Ed Enoch, J.D.'s son-in-law, ducked behind a piano and yelled, "Give me a gun, give me a gun." Bill Bays, a very religious member of the group, dove under a table and recited every prayer he knew. I then doubled back behind and through the kitchen, near the bar, says Sonny, the assassin. The guns had fallen silent. J.D. then slowly raises himself from Presley's prone form. Just as J.D.'s head pokes over the level of the bar, Sonny fires again. I fired like I was shooting at his head from about 10 or 12 feet away, and the wad from the blank hits him in the head. J.D. yelled out "Goddamn," which is understandable even for a gospel singer. Donnie Sumner, who is behind the bar, sees Sonny's pigskin-coated hand poking around the corner, although he can't see his face. In a desperate move he picks up a big can of tomato juice, grabs Sonny's hand and slings his missile around the corner hoping it will connect with the assassin. His hand slipped off mine and the can missed me and crashed against the wall, according to Sonny, who then wheeled around the corner pointing the gun at Donnie Sumner. "You're a dead son of a bitch," he said. Donnie's face registered shock. Sonny, oh my God. He thought Sonny had flipped and was the killer. Ed Enoch by this time had reached for one of the dead security guards' guns and was pulling the trigger, which produced nothing but dull clicks. Donnie Sumner was slumped on the floor in a near faint. Presley had been laughing convulsively through it all. J.D. Sumner had felt it as he was sprawled across him but thought Presley was in a convulsion of fear. "It pretty much ended there," says Sonny, "but we all thought Donnie Sumner was out of it. It was a long while before the blood started circulating in his face. We had to fix him a drink." The night ended in an uproar of hilarity as the story was retold. All agreed that J.D. and his boys had performed admirably under fire. That night Sonny and Red could have got an Oscar. While the bodyguards of the Memphis Mafia were always sensitive to death threats and the safety of their boss, the concert audiences in Vegas and particularly on tour were another source of worry. It was feared that someone in the audience would get killed. Red West, from the early days on the road with Presley, was used to the hysteria, but after Presley's comeback, it was even more horrific. "I swear," says Red, "I don't know how someone hasn't been killed at some of these shows. There have been a lot of people hurt, but it's a miracle somebody hasn't been killed." Dave Hebler is just as incredulous. Sonny West relates, "People in these crowds aren't people anymore. They become absolute animals. They are ordinary honest men and housewives and stuff, and yet when they get in that crowd when Elvis is up there, they become wild animals." Dave Hebler, when he first started, knew that the security work would be tough. "It's not a matter of duking a guy out. Any idiot can do that. You have to use minimum force to keep things cool without letting any madman get up and hurt Elvis. When I started, I was amazed to see respectable grown ladies take their pants off in a class showroom like the International Hotel in Las Vegas, take their pants off, show everything and wave their panties at him and throw them on the stage. Any way you look at it, it's pretty way, but disgusting for a grown woman to behave that Elvis just does it to them. There are no plants in the audience to do it for publicity. It happens. But it was in towns where they played a convention center or an auditorium that held 10 to 12,000 people that the real problems started." Dave recounts a situation that once got out of hand in the Omni Hall in Atlanta, Georgia. It's an amphitheater set. Up, there is a high stage about 10 feet off the ground, but 2 feet away from the stage, there is a section of seats that slope upwards. There is a 10-foot drop onto a concrete floor between the stage and where the seating begins. Well, Elvis has reached the part of his act where he throws out about 50 scarves into the audience. I look out into the audience and I just go cold. The crowd has gone berserk and is charging the stage. The cops in Atlanta were great, but they couldn't stop this charge. But worst of all was where I was on the edge of the stage trying to stop people leaping over the railing and jumping the 2 feet onto the stage. Because if they missed they would have gone straight down onto the concrete. Of course that's what happened. First this girl takes a running leap down from the stairs, over the rail. There are dozens of people crushed against the railing and I'm terrified a little kid is going to get crushed to death. As it happened, that tragedy was never far off, and it was only quick work by the cops and Red and Sonny and me that stopped a tragedy. But on this night, this chick comes flying over the rail. I catch her, a 200-pound broad. I'm holding her with one arm and a cop underneath is climbing up to stop her. Eventually he loses his footing and they both go down. Whomp. Bodies on concrete. Then another girl comes over and she goes down. God, it was sickening. In the end 3 broads came over there. The cops and the girls were carted off. Meanwhile on the other side, a scarf flutters around a girl's neck. Red recalls, it looped around her neck and a pair of maniacs grabbed both ends. Well, they would not let go. This girl is choking to death and the sons of bitches would not let go. I see it and the girl is going down. She is dying. Man, I got across there and there was no hope of trying to battle with them. These 2 broads who were pulling at each end had a death grip. I whipped out a knife and cut it before it was too late. Then the broads were fighting over the shreds of scarf. It was scary. In Hampton Roads, Virginia, Red remembers that the crowd completely swamped 30 policemen. Those cops there were getting badly hurt. There is no way 30 police can really control a mad rush of 300 or 400 people. They just crushed these guys against the stage, knocked the hell out of them. They pulled Charlie Hodge off the stage and passed him over their heads like baggage. When they decided he was too small a fish, they threw him back like a javelin. In San Diego, the situation got very ugly mainly because there was no regular police on duty. The San Diego Police Department don't let their men moonlight like most towns, says Dave. So we have to have cops. They aren't trained and they either overreact or do nothing at all. Well, hell broke loose and people are going down everywhere. This one girl just kicked the hell out of 2 of them, booted them in the groin and down they went. In Springfield, Massachusetts, when the cops started telling everyone to sit down, Elvis really blew it. We're here said, don't take any notice of the cops. Have fun. If you want to scream and jump around that's what we're here for. Well, I come from up that way and I knew that was the wrong thing to say because in this convention center, which held about 18,000 people, about 1,000 of them just charged the stage. Man, the cops didn't have a chance. Once again I saw a broad do something awful to these 2 cops, kick them in the groin. There are cops falling like flies. I'll never know how we got out of there alive. Red, Sonny and Dave got most annoyed at mothers who held their 2-year-old and 3-year-old children up to get a scarf. The kids would be terrified. They didn't want a scarf. Their mothers did and they risked their children's lives to get one. All the boys have rescued children from under the feet of stampeding mobs. Dave recalls, the worst thing is when someone wheels some poor unfortunate up to the stage in a wheelchair. They tell you that they are dying of leukemia and only have 3 weeks to live. You have to get them out of there because when the riot starts they will only have about a minute to live. One incident that sticks out in my mind was this woman yelling for a scarf. I'm trying to calm her down and ease her out of the way of getting crushed to death and she yells at me, but my daughter has got emphysema. Don't you understand? She has emphysema. That blew my mind. Presley encourages the pandemonium. Sonny says that Presley told him, when they stop attacking me, I'm dead. When an audience is quiet and polite, he will go to any lengths to get their juices going. Red West remembers the time Presley actually bought an audience. It happened in North Carolina, in 1973. He was in the dressing room, says Red, and he told me that the audience wasn't worth a damn. They weren't responding, which wasn't really true. This was pretty much a rural audience and they were very enthusiastic but they were polite. There were no riots, which he had been getting used to. When he would come across a quiet audience, he would often chew them out. He would tell them, you are allowed to clap, you know, or he would say, this is where the audience usually applauds. But he wasn't turned on by this audience at all. Well, after the first show he decided to get a request box going. The audience would write their requests and he would sing them. He thought that might boost them a little. But once again, no riots. Okay, so he gets Joe Esposito to get in touch with a Memphis jeweler, Lowell Hayes, who was a good friend of ours, and he tells him to bring up some rings. He even gets Lowell to fly back to Memphis and get more than the first load of rings he got. Well, Lowell comes racing back with all these rings. Now I can't remember exactly, but there is in excess of $30,000 worth of rings. There was one, which I know was worth $18,000, and plenty of others worth $5,000. Presley came out on stage and introduced J. D. Sumner of the Stamps. Sumner's left hand is what he calls Elvis Presley's hand. It is festooned with rings and jewelry Presley has given him. The boys guess that gifts to Sumner total in excess of $100,000 in jewelry alone. Presley came out on stage and, as was often his habit, he said over the mic, "J. D. hold up your right hand and show them your jewels," which J. D. always dutifully does. Then he said, "Hold up my hand," and then J. D. held up his Elvis Presley hand with all the on it. Then Presley bent down and took off a very expensive ring and handed it to a man in the first row. The audience snapped. Then a woman came down, and he repeated the process. Then another, and another ring came off the hand. He then gave rings to gifts. Each member of the band, whoever was there, got one. The audience just went crazy, says Red. These weren't dress rings. These were real diamonds and sapphires and stuff like that. On that night he gave away maybe $35,000 worth of rings. It was insanity. But he got what he wanted and when he wanted it. And what he wanted were those waves of love from the audience at any price. With a smile, Red recalls that watching this lavish gift giving from the wings was Vernon Presley, who had an expression on his face approximating the reaction to a bad pain. Old Vernon would look like he was going to die whenever Elvis started the gift-giving business. We used to crack up when we would see him get that look on his face and he would clap his hands to his head. While Presley could be capable of some of the wildest gimmicks to turn an audience on, he could also, when under the influence of the wrong kind of medication, be capable of saying outrageous things to an audience. In Greensboro, North Carolina, the audience buying performance Presley was at, living to the audience in his introductions. When Presley is feeling good, his sense of humor is sometimes as keen as the most accomplished comics. This was a night when it decidedly was not. One of his featured singers was a very talented, pretty soprano named Kathy Westmoreland. In the recent past, he had taken to introducing Kathy with the aside, "This is Kathy Westmoreland. She doesn't care where she gets her fun." And then he would introduce the Sweet Inspirations, a talented group of black female singers who had been with him from his first opening night in Las Vegas, then as a quartet but now a trio with another aside. Their breath smells like they have been eating catfish, an apparent but very unfunny reference to the fact that they ate soul food. After 2 or 3 instances when Presley made his reference to Kathy Westmoreland, Red remembers that she very politely mentioned to Joe Esposito that she wished he would stop introducing her in this way because she was getting obscene telephone calls. Very diplomatically, Joe mentioned this to Presley. Neither Kathy nor the Inspirations appreciated the introductions. On the Greensboro night, Red recalls that Presley got up and said, "This is Kathy Westmoreland, our soprano singer who doesn't like the way I introduce, and if she doesn't like it, she can get her hell off the stage." Dave Hebler remembers that there was a shock in the audience. You could have heard a pin drop. Damn. It was so damn embarrassing just to hear it. I wanted to dive into a big hole. First Estelle of the Inspirations starts to cry, then Sylvia, another of the group, starts to cry. They both walk off the stage in tears. Then Kathy gets up, very distraught, and walks off. The audience just doesn't know what to do. It was mass embarrassment. The only one of the girls to stay on stage was Myrna Smith of the Inspirations, who was going with Jerry Schilling. Myrna is stuck there, the only one left. And Elvis makes this big thing of going over to her and taking off a diamond ring from his finger and gives it to her. Poor Myrna. She nearly died from embarrassment. This was supposed to be a gesture toward her because she stayed on. She gave it back to him after the show, but he refused to take it. Presley got through the act using J. D. Sumner and his quartet to sing back up for the numbers that the Inspirations would have done. After the show, Presley was insane with rage. We get in the car to go to the motel, Dave says. In the car is Red, me, Dick Robb, Joe Esposito, Elvis, and he had this blonde-haired girlfriend from Georgia. The scene is maniacal. We're all talking at once to calm him down, get the thing straightened out. But, I promise you, he had gone completely off his head with rage. He couldn't take the fact that someone would stand on a principle and go against the great Elvis Presley. Presley was vitriolic. Turning to Joe Esposito, he said, "Joe, get me another nigger group." Then he switched his wrath to Jerry Schilling, who was going with Myrna Smith. As Dave points out, Jerry Schilling I was not around, or there most certainly would have been blood flowing. Finally, Presley consented to having Kathy Westmoreland and the Inspirations finish the tour, although he was going to fire them after the trip. A little bit of sanity came from a member of Colonel Parker's office, who told all the girls not to worry. Their jobs would be secure. He told everyone, "Look, Elvis is just too lazy to break in another group. Your jobs are secure." He was right, and they are still with him today, although whether they remain out of loyalty or because it suits their career is open to question. Red West, Bodyguard, was also an accomplished songwriter and as such was much closer to Presley musically than any of the other boys. Between 1969 and 1976, Red acted as a conductor for Presley. The king of rock and roll could have afforded the best music technicians in the world, but he relied heavily on Red's musical skill. Because Presley can't read music, he would count on Red to cue him in with the lyrics. It is ironic perhaps that Red, who during the years when he was close to Presley spent so much time swinging punches, was to some degree the musical brains behind many of Presley's best recordings. It went even further than that. The millions of teenagers who rocked to some of Presley's most gigantic hits didn't realize that a quiet, slow, talking bodyguard was the genius behind the music. Elvis just asked me to pick out the music, says Red. There would be 10 or 12 musical spots on each film. Now there would be anything up to 20 songs competing for each spot. Elvis just handed the job over to me. I was flattered, and I guess I did a pretty good job because those records sold millions and millions. By 1970, Red could see the first subtle signs of Presley's professional decline. Elvis really started getting lazy, he says. He still had his skill, his instinct, but he started getting into all the heavy stuff he was taking. Anyway, I first noticed it when we were doing a recording session at RCA Victor in Nashville. I just sensed that he didn't want to do the recording session, and I was right. There were 3 numbers he had to do. If Every Day Was Like Christ Moss, a song I wrote for him, and there was Unscribably Blue and I'll Remember You. Presley began to pull the first in a long line of non-appearances at recording sessions. He told Red he was sick, which Red took with a pinch of salt. Red, said Presley, you go down and cut the tracks. You sing with the orchestra. I'll dub it in later on. Red West is a man who is rarely frightened of anything, but he was suddenly scared to death. Presley holed up in a motel while Red went to RCA Victor's famous Music Row. The boyhood buddy and general factotum all at once had millions of dollars riding on his shoulders. He was to sing exactly as Presley would. Behind him were Jake Hess and the Imperial Quartet as the back-up group. Every musician in the band behind Red was the top man in his field in Nashville, which meant tops in the country. Red admits that at the time he was taking some of Presley's prescribed medicine, amphetamines. I was high and I was nervous, he says, but these guys made me feel really at ease. And, good Lord, I pulled it off. He did the 3 singles in 7 hours, approximately the time it would have taken Presley. Felton Jarvis, Presley's record producer, came over to Red at the end of the session and said, "Man, you did a hell of a job. I appreciate what you have done. Because there was a hell of a lot of money going down the drain if somebody had not done something." Of course, 2 months later Presley went back and dubbed in the voice, but Red had to sing in the exact key that he thought Presley would sing in, and with the identical timing. If Every Day Was Like Christmas, the song that Red wrote, and I'll Remember You each sold almost 2 million discs, which wasn't a bad day's work for a guy who was supposed to be just a bodyguard. Typical of Red West's musical vision had to do with the now famous song with which Presley scored a big hit, The Green Green Grass of Home. Red had heard the song in 1966 on a Jerry Lee Lewis album, and he took it to Presley. "Man, this is a heck of a number," Red told him. "Why don't you give it a try?" Country music had not yet reached the popularity of today. Presley listened, but halfway through he said, "No, man, it's too country." In 1970, driving back from Los Angeles in the Presley Greyhound bus, the group heard Tom Jones's rendition of it on the radio. Presley turned up the volume. "Man, that's a hell of a song," he said. Red raised his eyebrows. When the group got into the range of WHQB, the Memphis radio station, Presley stopped the bus and asked Marty Lacker to telephone the station's top disc jockey, and his old school friend, George Klein, and ask him to play the tune. About every 50 miles. Presley repeated this. Suddenly he had a passion for the song. When they got to Memphis, he told Marty Lacker to get the Tom Jones album, which Presley played until it almost wore out. In early 1976, when Presley did his album Elvis at Home, Green Green Grass of Home was Presley's first choice. "Hell, that was the tune I recommended to you 4 years ago," Red told him. Presley looked up and said, "It sure sounded different then." Needless to say, it became yet another Presley hit. Red recalls such anecdotes with something close to regret. "Look, Elvis never forced me to be a bodyguard, but the way it turned out, that was how I was regarded. I remember one guy calling me a pistolero. Well, I regret that. Music has been my life, and I sometimes think that if I hadn't fallen for the demands of Elvis wanting me to look after him and had done my own thing in music, I might have been wrestling with music score in a studio rather than with some half-drunk or mad gal who was trying to throw her panties at Elvis." In the 1973-74 period, Red, Sonny and Dave saw just how incredibly Presley could dive from absolute heights, physically and emotionally, to the rock bottom. It is a tribute to this man's phenomenal constitution and his gigantic talent that in 1973 he could in 1 year perform one of the most memorable engagements of his life, the satellite television special, watched by more people in the world than man's landing on the moon and degenerate into a screaming emotional wreck. The separation and subsequent divorce from Priscilla played heavily on Presley's mind. Similar traumas have shattered stronger men, but it ushered into his life and the lives of the Memphis Mafia an incredible yo behavior pattern. Sonny recalls that the satellite special, seen by a billion people throughout the world, was a crowning glory for Presley's talent and for the Colonel's. After all, if successful promotion is gauged by the size of the audience, the satellite special had to be the greatest show on earth in the history of show business or any other business. Man, we were going through tough times, says Sonny. Elvis's diet was going mad. He would eat whole gigantic cakes all by himself. He would get mad at us after he ate the stuff, and if we hid it from him he would get mad again. He was very fat and he had a lot of problems with his stomach, which just quit working. His body wasn't working. The pills were doing all the work, and yet when that television special came up, he dropped down to 165 pounds, thin as a rake and more handsome than 10 movie stars. But after it was over, it was back to Las Vegas and on tour, doing the same old stuff. There was a time right in there, says Sonny, when I thought I would have a nervous breakdown. Joe Esposito was being run ragged too. It was the same old thing. Even if he had a girl with him he would wake us up and we would have to go to his bedroom and talk to him until he dropped off. But he was so wired with so much stuff in him we would get a call an hour later. I was taking sleeping tablets and Valium to knock myself out. When he and Joe had a flare-up, Elvis picked up an ashtray and threatened to smash Joe's head in with it. Then when he went on stage, he was doing all this talking and fooling around with the audience. They paid their money to hear him sing and perform, not give his philosophies on life. During one such period, Presley and the Colonel came perilously close to a parting of the ways. The Colonel had always been concerned about Presley's health and his physical condition. When Presley suddenly got enamored of a particular singing group, which he wanted to sign for $100,000 a year, Sonny recalls that the Colonel pointed out that their worth to the entourage was only $50,000. Elvis was insistent. One night he was really out of it. He called me into his suite in the International Hotel and he had made up a damn contract on toilet paper to give this group, which I won't mention, $100,000. Now, the Colonel knew what they were worth. They were good but not $100,000 good. The old man is never wrong. So he brings me in and wants me to witness the signing of a contract for $100,000. I refused to do it. He got mad as hell at me. But I knew he wasn't functioning properly at the time. That started a little friction. Next came an incident where a chef at the hotel was fired. Presley had become close to this chef and he was annoyed about the firing. So much so that he took his complaint to the audience. Red recalls, he got up there on stage and started putting down the management of the hotel that was employing him. It was madness. He told the audience that the hotel wouldn't fire the chef as long as he was working there. The Colonel was furious. He had swung a very lucrative contract from the International Hotel and had done everything to stick by his part of the bargain. The International Hotel, in turn, had been very good to the Colonel and Presley. It was a sound business relationship. According to Sonny, the Colonel exploded. You can't tell them how to run their business. What right have you got to say a thing like that on stage? Presley and the Colonel locked horns. They blew up at each other and disappeared into Presley's suite. The Colonel emerged with the words, "Okay, I'll call a press conference in the morning and say I'm leaving." According to Red West, Presley replied, "I'll call a press conference tonight." 93 Actually what happened is the Colonel stayed up and worked out all the money that was due to him, says Red. I didn't see the figures, but it was like $1 million due him for this and $1 million for that. Elvis showed Vernon the figures. Vernon was ready for the Colonel to leave, but then after looking at the figures, things seemed to quiet down. Apart from the trouble over his marriage break-up and friction with the Colonel, Presley's throat was in bad shape. Doctors were using suction devices to clear it of congestion. There was a fear that Presley might be developing pneumonia. The strength of the Memphis Mafia was weakened by the departure of Joe Esposito and Jerry Schilling on a trip to Europe. Sonny seemed to be sleeping about an hour a day. I tell you, says Sonny, I was going nuts looking after him with his actions. 2 weeks after the blow-up between Presley and the Colonel, Sonny West was at his wit's end. I talked to a doctor friend of mine who had given Elvis a shot. I got his assurance that it would knock him out for at least 5 or 6 hours. I got him to give me a shot too. Damn it. An hour after, at about 8 o'clock in the morning, Elvis wakes me and wants me to come to his room. God almighty, I couldn't believe it. I go into his room and he is awake. I don't know how he did it, because I had the same shot as he did and I was wasted. Presley looked at Sonny and said, I've been thinking, we're going to have to call that old son of a bitch because he ain't going to call us. Sonny replied, who? Presley said only 2 words, the Colonel. Sonny got onto the Colonel, who commented that was slurring his words. "I've just taken a shot and Elvis woke me," Sonny told him. "He wants to speak to you." Sonny did not stay there during the conversation, but he believes Presley apologized. He recalls there had been a lot of speculation among the boys whether the break would be final. Some thought the relationship was at its breaking point. Others thought that Jerry Weintraub, the manager of Frank Sinatra and John Denver, would be the man to fill the Colonel's shoes, but Sonny thought otherwise. No, Elvis would never listen to Jerry, as good a manager as he is, and that's why deep down he doesn't like the Colonel, because he has to listen to him. He knows what the Colonel has done for him. They are the two greatest at what they do. It was meant that they were to come together no matter how much friction. The two of them are like an immovable object meeting an irresistible force. The split was over. After the nightmare in Las Vegas that Sonny went through, Presley had some idea how far he had pushed him. Soon after he bought Sonny a gleaming Eldorado. By this time, it was an accepted fact that Presley's emotional and physical state fluctuated like the stock exchange. In 1974, Sonny, who had been doing advance work with the Colonel, had not seen Presley for about a month. He had always been in the city ahead of the tour, finalizing security details and taking care of the general logistics of the Presley caravan. Dave remembers that Sonny finally saw Presley in College Park, Maryland. Sonny got an awful shock to see the condition he was in. He was so torn up physically and emotionally, the tears just came to Sonny's eyes. That day, Red West, Sonny West and Dave Hebler went into a room in a motel in College Park, Maryland, and said a prayer to God to put their boss back on the right track. "That's right, we all prayed together," says Dave, "and I promise you, I'm not a particularly religious person, but that's how we felt about the man.